Welcome to New Stripe City, a YouTube channel for diehard Bengals fans. I'm your host, Ace Boogie, and tonight we normally have our podcast, which features me and your boy Zim Hude. We decided that Zim could not make it tonight, so I'm going to go ahead and fill in the gaps. But we have a lot to talk about tonight. Mainly, we're going to talk about the Clint Boling retirement, which, if you haven't checked my video, the instant reaction to that video earlier, I actually posted it, so be sure to check that out. I'm also going to talk about the Bengals' fantasy outlook, what things look like for them from a fantasy standpoint. We'll also talk about some of the Bengals' Madden ratings and whatever you guys want to talk about. So, starting things off, we can talk about the Clint Boling retirement. Obviously, if you've been following along with this show, me and Zim kind of touched on that last week. We kind of figured not exactly that he would retire, but we knew that the news on him was mum, especially since we didn't hear much outside of him not being able to pass a physical. You heard Joe Goodberry talk about it too. I heard similar things as well from some of my insiders. Heard from Mark Herman a little bit of the same thing as well from the AFC Northerners. If you aren't following him, be sure to subscribe there as well. But this news kind of shook us up a little bit, but not necessarily because there were signs that were kind of there that told us all off season that this could be happening. I mean, it was a possibility, a high possibility that Bowling was going to actually be a cap casualty. So the fact that this happened wasn't necessarily really shocking or anything in that nature, but it does leave the Bengals with an open door at a competition at the left guard position. The left tackle position is also in jeopardy as Jonah Williams also was injured early on during minicamp. So the Bengals on the left side of the line, there are a lot of question marks, but you still have a guy like John Jerry there. Bowling has been there at the left guard position since 2011, but this opens a possibility for a new scheme, new players to be able to fill in there. You also talk about Michael Jordan. I doubt that he's ready to step in there right now. He's a little bit more of a raw prospect, but I think that he can do what he needs to do there. So moving on, let's talk about some of the fantasy outlook. We kind of touched last week, and Zim kind of said, "Hey, we want to talk a little bit about fantasy football." So the first thing that I want to talk about are some of the players and where they can get drafted at. So for me, I think you guys should probably know this, but the guy with the most value right now is going to be Joe Mixon. And Joe Mixon right now in 12-man leagues, he's being drafted in the first round with the 10th pick. I myself, I haven't looked at much of the fantasy stuff until today. I expected to personally draft him within the first round. He was a guy that kind of rose last year. He rose on a lot of draft boards last year, and I mean he led the AFC North in rushing last year, and especially with a new scheme in here, similar to Todd Gurley, who I believe was the number one fantasy back last year. You talk about putting Joe Mixon in that same offense, and of course, guys are going to want to take him in fantasy. So, with Joe Mixon being on the board there, you can have him in the first round. Expect him to be drafted in the first round, around the 11th or 10th pick, maybe even higher than that as we get closer. There's other guys around him such as James Conner from Pittsburgh, a couple of other guys out there. But with fantasy being a running back heavy kind of option, this is a guy that you have to have, especially in half PPR, or standard leagues. What's going on, Steve? Um, so Joe Mixon is a guy. Now the steal of the draft right now has to be AJ Green in the third round. His current ADP is in the third round in 12 team and 14 team leagues. AJ Green is just a guy that's going to get it done. I would think that maybe he's fallen off a little bit. He was kind of around the second round last year, mid to second round. I probably say mid second round to the end of the second round was where he would get drafted. But it seems like a lot of fantasy players right now are shying away from him just due to the injury history. And so this is an excellent value, probably one of the best value picks that you're going to get from the Bengals is AJ Green in the third round. So I know you guys, there's literally a league that I'm in where people know that I'm going to draft AJ Green if he's on the board. So I tend to try to draft him a little bit earlier. This would be the perfect year for me. So I will probably look, depending on where you pick at. Everybody picks different. You have a snake draft. If you have something on a snake draft and you know that a guy is going to go in the third round, if you're at the end of the second round, definitely take AJ Green there. I would personally. After that, we've got Tyler Boyd. He's got two different ADPs in two different rounds. For the 12 man leagues, he's going in the sixth round. For the big boy leagues that I play in, which are the 14 team leagues, he's going in the fifth round. So he's actually going earlier in leagues that have more people in them. So Tyler Boyd in the sixth, I think you're getting decent value there. I think you're looking at a wide receiver two there, which I think Tyler Boyd could be, but you have to account for some of the other things around him with a healthy AJ Green being back, John Ross looking to explode this year. Um, I'm not sure if he can go ahead and get 1,000 yards again, but he should still be a dependable wide receiver two. I think for you with upside to be possibly a wide receiver one if the Bengals or AJ Green is to get hurt for a few games. I definitely think that he has um, some potential there. Hey, what's going on, The Undertaker? Yes, yes, man. I'm definitely looking forward to this season as well, my friend. Definitely looking forward to the season as well. If you just joined us, I briefly kind of talked on Clint Boling. I also kind of talked about some of the Bengals' fantasy implications for the upcoming season, which players I think are good, where their ADPs are, where you should draft them. So we'll continue on. Zim is not here with me tonight. He had a prior engagement that he had to commit to. So it's just me tonight. So if you have any comments or anything, feel free to throw them in the comments. I'll be able to go through them. But now we're going back to the fantasy outlook, and next we have Giovanni Bernard, who's being taken in the 15th round, which is kind of a pick where you're a guy. If you have Joe Mixon, you might want to take that guy. If you don't have Joe Mixon, then Gio is probably a guy that you can try to trade to a guy that has Joe Mixon. You can kind of use it as his handcuff. If Joe Mixon, he missed 2 games last year, so he's a guy that you can kind of sell on that chip. If you don't have really many running backs or you just need some running back depth, Gio is a guy that you could take in the later rounds. If you have the PPR, he might be of some value in the PPR league. You probably might look for a 7 to 10 points. He's maybe a guy that you can start on a bye week. So I'll see. Um, I think 15 and 14th and 14 team leagues is where Gio should be going. Hey, what's up, Jazzy? Appreciate it, man. Much love, bro. Appreciate the shout out. How do I feel about Eifert this season? Eifert is actually the second guy that I'm talking about after Gio. And right now, believe it or not, he's going undrafted in 12 team leagues, which I believe is crazy. But understandable. Him coming off of so many injury plagued years, that is a hell of a bargain that you could get for a guy to be undrafted. Eifert, I think, is a guy that could go undrafted, and if week one or week two he comes out and he gets 1 or 2 touchdowns, he'll easily be off of that free agency wire list. So definitely look out for him. He has huge boom potential, as we all know. Whenever he's a part of this offense and is healthy, he's definitely a guy that can make an impact, especially from the tight end position, which is a hard position to get. So, if you get a guy like Travis Kelsey or Zach Ertz, you won't be looking for Eifert. But if you kind of have one of those Delaney Walker kind of guys, or one of those guys where you're just plugging and playing a tight end every week, go ahead and stash Tyler Eifert because you never know what he's going to do. And it looks like in the 14 team league, he actually is getting drafted in the 14th round. So, like I said, he's a guy that you could stash with huge boom potential. Andy Dalton is another guy in 12 team leagues that isn't being drafted right now. He could be a bye week replacement, or he could also be a guy that's a sleeper. In a 14 team league, he's being taken in the 15th round. You can't be mad at that. If you need another quarterback, or you have a kind of a guy there that you don't know if you can trust to be an everyday or every week starter, Andy Dalton is someone that you want to look at. He has high upside as well. I mean, you look back at 2015, he had a great year. He's in a new offense. This is going to be an offensive team. Andy Dalton is definitely a guy that you need to look at. I definitely think if you are there in the 15th round and he's still there and you're choosing between rookies and guys like that, why not take Andy Dalton? I mean, it makes perfect sense. And you never know. Quarterbacks get hurt. If Dalton is able to put together a decent season where he's averaging 20 points, that's a guy that you can throw out there and dangle out there for possibly a wide receiver two, a running back two later on in the season. That's one of the things that I like to do is I like to grab my starting quarterback and then I also like to grab a guy with some upside. Last year for me that was Andrew Luck. And by the midway point, when they're having a good season and a guy has a quarterback that gets injured, you can sell him a guy like Andy Dalton. You can do that and upgrade your wide receiver core, your running back core, your tight end core, because quarterbacks are pretty valuable in fantasy. I mean, there's different rules. Obviously, if you're in a two quarterback league, you're probably picking Andy Dalton way before that. But if you're in a one quarterback league, a standard league, or something like that, where you need that quarterback between 14 teams, that's a guy that you can kind of have as an insurance plan. So, the next guy, John Ross, is actually, believe it or not, being undrafted in 12 teams leagues. He's being drafted in the 14th. John Ross, I think, is this year's Tyler Boyd in terms of from a fantasy perspective. He's the guy that everyone's kind of sleeping on. Tyler Boyd went kind of late or undrafted last year. Nobody really had him on their radar. He was inactive some games, and John Ross could be that guy if they're able to formulate some kind of role for him or things of that nature. So that is a guy that you can kind of cash on. When you get into the later rounds, I'm talking 12 through 15, those are going to be the rounds where you want to take chances. At least that's what I do. I won three fantasy championships last year. I was in three leagues. I've been playing fantasy for a while. Those are the times that you want to kind of swing for a guy that could get some upside there. So if you find a guy like John Ross, you find a guy out there that has some high upside, that might be where you want to take him. So getting back to the comments, it looks like the Undertaker said that he's doing all right. He thinks that we should win a playoff game and win the Super Bowl this season, Super Bowl or bust. I like that outtake. William Jackson III is underrated. I definitely agree with you, Steve. I'm actually gonna go ahead and get into these Madden ratings pretty soon. What about the Bengals defense? The Bengals defense, I mean, depending on what your rules are from a fantasy standpoint, the Bengals defense last year obviously was horrible, but they're a unit that has potential to at least be a middling tier fantasy defense. I think like if you're on a bye week and you don't have a main defense, you can stash the Bengals and use them on and off depending on the matchup. I would really play them dependent on the matchup. You talk about the beginning of the season, they might have some favorable matchups against some teams that you would want to play them against, and maybe it's a team where they have a propensity to get a high amount of turnovers. That could be a game where you play them. I usually keep the Bengals defense myself, but for me as a fan, one thing that I learned last year is I used to be a guy that would have like five, six Bengals on my team, and last year I just didn't force it. So if you think, because I found myself playing the Bengals defense, and then we would get murdered because on paper we have a good defense, but sometimes we don't play up to par, and sometimes things get in the way. So make sure that you're playing them based off of the matchups. If you look at just pulling up the schedule here this year, some games that I obviously would avoid playing them in would be, it looks like, let's see here. Actually, they have a pretty favorable start to the season. So Seahawks, that's kind of like maybe at most they might get about 8 to 10 points. I think there. 49ers, I mean, depending on Jimmy Garoppolo, you could start them there. The Bills, I definitely start them, especially with a young quarterback there. Cardinals, I start them there too, even though Kyler Murray is a good quarterback. It's still going to be early in the season. They have some games that you could play them, but there's also some games that I would want no parts of with them. Like you talk about the Rams, you kind of talk about the Ravens. I kind of have to see what they do against Lamar Jackson this year, based on last year. So there's some teams, the Browns, obviously you don't want to play them that late in the season. So just make sure that if you are picking the Bengals defense, that you're playing them in situations that are favorable towards them. And rare we trust, yes, TJ. Andy Dalton is probably the most underrated QB in football, is what Banana Clips Casey says. If everybody on this roster can stay healthy this season, we can have a good season to get to the playoffs, finally end the drought. I agree with that. I don't know if we'll win the Super Bowl. I hope. I'm not gonna jinx us. We can be the first team in 10 years to beat Seattle in CenturyLink Field in the month of September for the first time since September 2009. That's quite a nugget there. But anyways, the next thing that I want to talk about is the Madden ratings. I don't know if you guys saw them. They came out today. There's quite some controversy on that front. Outside of the Bengals, people are talking about Aaron Rodgers taking such a deep drop from the 99 club last year all the way down to a 90 rating. And, certain people are rated over or rated higher than others. And it's always kind of an issue, right? Like most people either like their Madden ratings, but most people don't agree with them. Most people can't stand what their ratings are and things of that nature. So for me, when I saw some of the ratings, I wasn't really too surprised because with the Bengals, we never really get much love. There were some eyebrow raisers for me, just looking around at the division and some of the people and what their ratings were in comparison to the Bengals. But for you guys that don't know, I will go through some of the top Bengals here. So we have Geno Atkins, that's a 91. That's no surprise there. AJ Green comes in second highest at an overall 90. Tyler Eifert is still riding pretty high on Madden. He's overall 88. Joe Mixon 88. William Jackson is an 84, which I was fine with until I saw that Marlon Humphrey was rated higher than him. He's the same rating as Joe Hayden. That just didn't kind of add up to me, in my opinion. Tyler Boyd is an 83, so I kind of like that. That's kind of where Tyler I think should be at. Carlos Dunlap is an 82. I feel like that's a little low for him, but he's kind of been around that 84, 80-ish mark in the past. Jesse Bates, the third, is an 81. Carl Lawson is an 81. Andy Dalton is an 80. Giovanni Bernard takes a step back this year, probably because of the emergence of Joe Mixon. He moves back to a 79. Sean Williams is a 79. I mean, you pretty much have most of these guys in the 70s. CJ Uzoma moved up to a 78, so that's pretty good for him. Darquez Denard, I think he's a little underrated at being a 77. Preston Brown, 75. Cordy Glenn, 74. John Ross is still a 74 with a 97 speed, which is ridiculous. I don't understand that. You had the guy that broke the 40 record and you have him at a 97 speed. That's ridiculous. Sam Hubbard improved from last year and moves up to a 73. I think he's kind of in a prove it kind of situation. Jordan Willis, it just doesn't make sense that those two guys have the same rating. Jordan Willis is a 73. Hubbard, I think, should be higher. If Jordan Willis is a 73, I think Hubbard's at least a 76. Andrew Billings is a 72. Jonah Williams, even though he's not playing this year, 72. Billy Price, 71. Drew Sample is a 71. That was kind of surprising. Alex Erickson is a 70. John Miller is a 70. What you guys probably don't want to know is that BW Webb 68. That's kind of harsh. What you guys probably don't want to know is that Bobby Hart is a 64, and he will be starting at the right tackle position. So Bengals, they have some top heavy guys, but it looks like a lot of the guys are in the 70s and 60s. So not sure exactly what the overall team grade is, but we'll have to see how those things work out. But appreciate you guys for coming through. I'm definitely going to open the forum for any questions that you might have. Anything you guys want me to touch on, let me know. But if not, we can probably see where this is gonna go. I know kind of was a little bit impromptu. I wasn't sure if I was gonna stay on or go on tonight without Zim, but I decided to go ahead and go through with it. So if you guys have any questions, let me know in the comments. If not, we'll wait for a couple minutes here. If not, then I will let you guys go and have a good night. I mean, it's been a tough off season for us so far, especially with Jonah Williams getting hurt, especially with Clint Boling retiring. One thing that this does open, I'll say before I leave, is that this opens up some cap space. So the Bengals have about 24 million in cap space that they can play with. That's money to go and get a tackle. That's money to go and get a linebacker. Um, You don't have to get them from free agency. You could trade for these guys. If they're able to be had for maybe a 6th or 7th round pick, go ahead and go and get these guys. I think that's what you should do. You talk about a guy like Donald Penn, you're going to need some more veteran presences over there on the left side of that line. You're going to bring back Cordy Glenn over there. You're probably going to put Westerman in. That gives him a chance to show what he's got. But, you know, the depth there kind of goes down without Clint Boling being there. But as usual, thanks to you guys for tuning in. Let me know in the comments if you have any additional questions outside of the live. And as usual, I'll leave you with a who day all day, every day, especially on Sunday.